I was 8 years old. I remember going into the local record store, asking the guy behind the counter saying, hey, I want to listen to some heavy metal. Can you recommend me something? I remember him pulling out this Metallica, Ride the Lightning. Started playing it. It starts with Fight Fire with Fire, and then it just blasts into the heavy stuff, unleashing on my parents' record collection, listening to Dark Side of the Moon, and being really transported on the journey. There's always been that sort of scent within me of being a bit of an outsider. I didn't really fit in, was feeling very frustrated. Learned about the concept of masking, and then sort of thinking about it, I'm like, have I been doing this? Understanding of anything to do with autism and neurodivergent, hearing stereotypes and not really thinking too much about it. I read some stuff about it, and then I was like, hey, kind of relatable. I'm walking past a construction site. It's something like, ding, like that bothers me because it's sort of like out of my control. Death metal band called Adrenochrome. This was the 2000s. There was a lot of that metalcore sort of stuff. I'm being a show pony. You know, I'm jumping around like a lunatic. But it's just what feels natural to me when I'm playing that kind of music. I have a bit of pride as a musician, you know. I don't want to be seen as like incompetent. We opened for a few bands, Bongzilla, Conan, Weed Eater, Windhand, a lot of sludgy stoner doom sort of. Don't get too caught up on other people's concepts of rules or standards. They may not apply to you, even though you may think that that's what you're supposed to do. For me, being as prepared as possible is the best way to manage anxiety on stage. Can't even imagine a life without having this obsession. I kind of just assume everyone thinks I'm weird, you know, so.
Today we're talking to Sam Leamy, a music wizard in Wellington, New Zealand, and trust us, he does a lot of cool stuff. He's the drummer for a band called After the Flesh. He also creates wild and explosive sound with groups like Thoughts Explode Through Skulls, Opium Eater, and Spork. He even crafts spooky nightmare sounds with Opiate Sleeper, and he's also DJ Doran on the anger management show live on Radioactive 88.6 FM. Sam's not just a performer, he's a neurodivergent brainiac too. He studied at Victoria University School of Music, where he earned a bachelor's degree of music in composition, a double major in instrumental music and sonic arts, and a master of fine arts in film scoring. This guy lives and breathes music, and today he is here to tell us all about his musical journey and how he used his special interest in music navigating his autism journey. By the way, don't forget to hit that follow or subscribe button to help people with the same interest find us. It means a lot to me, and thank you.
Welcome, Sam. Thank you for your time. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
First question, who is Sam?
Who is Sam? I am Sam. I was born in the UK. Mother is English, father's a Kiwi. I'm a middle child, so older brother, younger sister, a couple of years each way. Came to New Zealand when I was about 4, went back to the UK when I was about 8 or 9, came back here when I was 12, my 12th birthday actually, I remember that. So I guess my childhood was uprooted a fair bit, you know, backwards and forwards. Got into music from a very young age, toddler. I can't even really remember when it started, but yeah, it's never stopped. It's always been the obsession. Okay. And yeah.
When did you first find out your interest in music?
Do remember, have sort of little snippets of memories of when I was about 4 years old and listening to my parents' records and just being really just fascinated by it. Yeah, so I guess for me it feels like it's just always been there. Yeah, I can't really remember a starting point.
What sort of records have your parents been listening to?
Well, I specifically remember actually going to, the memory I have, the earliest musical memory I guess I have is going to my parents' friend's house with them, and then he had records of the Stranglers, and for some reason I was just really taken by that. Yeah, like 4 years old, and I can remember it's time to go home, but I just kept wanting to listen to the records. My mother has an amusing anecdote of being at the beach, where like on a family holiday, and there's a Strangler song with some somewhat rude lyrics in it, and apparently I was like building sandcastles and sort of just singing like Lemmy, fuck ya, like not really knowing what any of those words meant at the time, but
yeah. With your journey, is it coming from that? And can you talk to me about your musical journey in terms of listening to Stranglers and going through your musical journey?
Yeah, throughout primary school, I was just really interested in music. I can remember unleashing on my parents' record collection. Can have particular memories of things like listening to Dark Side of the Moon and being really transported on the journey of the journey aspect of the music. Really sort of just felt very powerful to me from a very young age. And like things like Mike Oldfield's Tubular Bells, I remember that one. That's another one which has a real journey to it. They had some like records like King Crimson and stuff. So, a lot of the sort of not very sort of mainstream rock music, a lot of it. Like I always had this sort of, my imagination was just taken by a lot of this music, which sort of felt like it was going on a journey. Being at primary school age, I don't think many of the other kids, it wasn't really even on their radar, but my mother got me into piano lessons from when I was about 5 years old, which was interesting. I think I kind of, I was much more interested in just playing around than sort of following like what I was supposed to learn, Right. Yeah, like I would, when you're going to piano lessons as a child, the teacher will give you some stuff to learn. And I kind of just didn't really care too much about that, So I didn't really learn in the way that I guess I was supposed to, or, how it was prescribed. But I would be kind of just making up stuff like, yeah. And but in saying that, I was also much more being really into rock music and stuff. I kind of just really wanted to play the guitar. I think I kind of got into that when I was about 9 or 10.
What drove you into that instrument instead of pursuing piano?
I think I just really wanted to do rock music, and I started getting into sort of heavier music and stuff. I can specifically remember the moment where I got into heavy metal. I was 8 years old and I saw it on some cartoon, some children's cartoon. There was like something which referenced had some kind of metal piece of music playing. I have no idea what it was, but just the sound of it just absolutely piqued my interest at the time. And I remember going into the local record store and asking the guy behind the counter saying, hey, I want to listen to some heavy metal music. Can you recommend me something? And then I remember him pulling out this Metallica Ride the Lightning tape. And because I was I was listening to cassette tapes at the time. This is the 90s. And I specifically remember him being like, oh, I have to let you listen to it through the listening booth, not through the store, because it's going to be too heavy or something. And I'm thinking, being an 8-year-old, I was like, ooh, this is a little bit naughty or something, And I can specifically remember it was Metallica Ride the Lightning, and I started playing it. It starts with Fight Fire with Fire. Anyone who knows that track knows it has that lovely classical guitar intro. And I remember thinking at the time, it's like, no, this isn't what I wanted. And then it just blasts into the heavy stuff. And it was just at a completely life-changing moment for me, and I just became obsessed with the heavier music from then. And I think that was the point where I really started wanting to learn the guitar, because I was just like, I want to do that, you can't do that on the piano. Yeah, yeah. And then so I started getting guitar lessons. Yeah, and I guess kind of the same thing happened in a way. Like I just wasn't really that interested in following. Like I would, because I wanted to learn, I sort of maybe made some effort to sort of practice a bit what they were trying to teach me, but really I was just wanting to just pursue this and make up stuff really. Yeah, so I don't really, when I say make up stuff, I wasn't really like writing coherent pieces of music at that point, but you know, like yeah, just much more interested in sort of just doing what I wanted to do rather than learning whatever pieces of music I was being
if we are going to being a neurodivergent person, is there a moment in time when you were growing up and you feel like you are seeing the word differently, but you kind of don't know what it is?
Yeah, I think there's always been that sort of sense within me of outsiderness, you know, like being a bit of an outsider. Like I didn't really fit in at primary school. I mean, at that point, I had no idea of what, you know, neurodivergent was. I just knew that I was different. My parents, you know, this is the 90s, like I said. So I think, you know,
It's like new.
Yeah, the awareness of it wasn't really like what it is now, you know, like I've had conversations with my mother and yeah, like they hadn't even sort of considered that sort of thing. They just knew that I was a weird kid, but didn't really think too much of it, you know? Yeah. And, but you know, yeah, really struggled with making friends at that age. I actually, it's quite interesting. It was when I became a teenager, and that's when people were kind of starting to get more into music and stuff, I felt, and that's when I started to make friends. So it was all kind of almost felt like it was connected to that, you know. It's like sort of other people were sort of getting interested into this thing which I'd been obsessed with since I was a toddler, you know.
Right. And what sort of spectrum are you?
I've got an autism diagnosis that came much later.
When you say much later, when was that?
Like within the last 3 years, actually. Yeah, I got my diagnosis in 2021. Yeah, so 3.5 years ago. But it was something that I'd sort of been reading up on. I think I sort of started to think about it maybe from my mid-20s. Yeah, and then like, you know, it was something where I'd sort of, I guess, you know, without the knowledge, I'd sort of only really thought of it in terms of the stereotypes, which didn't really necessarily apply to me. I'm not really a maths genius or anything like that, you know, like.
But music is kind of your thing.
Yeah, so, exactly.
Math, for me personally, math is music.
My initial sort of understanding of anything to do with autism and neurodivergence, it was really colored by not really, just you know, like hearing stereotypes and not really thinking too much about it. But then eventually, I can't really remember what point it was, but I had read some stuff about it, and then I was like, hey, wait, this actually feels kind of relatable. And the more I read about it, I was like, okay, there's something here. And then I can think of other people who I'm related to, like people in my own family. And I'm like, I think this applies to more than just me, you know. Yeah, eventually I just felt like I want to get a diagnosis, you know.
What's the turning point? I just want to know what's the turning point, like when you realize like, okay, I feel like I'm different. So what's the turning point for you, like to bring yourself up into a diagnosis?
I think I just was feeling very frustrated about being misunderstood. That's something that's always been kind of part of my psyche. I actually can remember I was in a relationship with somebody, and I'd sort of talked about this sort of thing, and they were kind of a bit dismissive about that sort of thing, and it kind of somehow became a really sticking point. with that relationship falling out, and I guess at that point in time, it just suddenly felt really important to me to get this diagnosis, because I was like, I feel like I'm getting misunderstood to the point where people aren't believing me when I'm sort of talking about my real life experiences and stuff. And and from then on, I kind of just really sort of became interested in pursuing that. It took quite, it was quite a challenge to get the diagnosis. I got it through the Victoria University Psych Clinic.
Is that the autism clinic? Autism clinic something? Or is it a different clinic?
No, it was just like, I can't remember specifically, but it was just the psychology department at Victoria University. They had kind of advertised doing diagnosis for autism, or I think I heard about it from someone else who had gone through it. Yeah, I'd spoken to my GP and they'd sort of given me a referral. Nothing happened through the public system. I think this is a pretty common sort of thing. Yeah. Feels like, it's just a very under-resourced and high demand system. And then I kind of I heard from somebody else about the university psych department, and I contacted them. They sort of gave me we're very full for the moment, sorry. And I kind of just decided to be really persistent, and eventually they accepted it, and I got went to several appointments. It was actually really rigorous. I think it must have been about 10 hours of interviews I went through.
10 hours?
Yeah, it was really...
But in serious? Like, stuck 10 hours.
No. It was over the space of like about 3 or 4 months, and I was going to like weekly appointments and stuff. And I think in a way, I actually really think that was a good way, because it felt very thorough, and I kind of was discovering things about myself as I was going through it as well, and it felt like they were like, I think because the way it was set up was that it was like PhD students doing that. I don't really know the full details of it, but and then I came out with the diagnosis. It was October 2021.
Do you remember when you were a child, if you're up to like cars, aligning cars?
Lining things up?
Lining things.
Yeah, I don't think I was lining up toy cars and stuff like that. There are definitely things that I remember that definitely seem like autistic traits, just like sensory issues and stuff like that, like real fussy eater, but textural. Yeah. This is when I was a child.
There's a but there. You were listening to heavy music and you don't have any sensory issues with loud noise. Like, I mean, it's loud, it's not noise, it's music.
Yeah.
In terms of like heavy metal and stuff, you didn't get like that sensory of...
And that's different. Like I get bugged by sort of some environmental sort of, like say if I'm walking past a construction site and then suddenly something like ding, like that bothers me, because it's sort of like out of my control in a way, I guess, and it's like sort of random and sort of you're not sort of, it's not an immersive environment,
Right.
I feel like there's I can't really quite explain it, but there's
a difference with like listening to music when it's like a stanza and a chorus and stanza and a chorus, you know what I mean? Like versus bang, like what the...
Yeah, or sort of just I don't really know how I can explain why it works that way, but for me, like I can blast music really loud and I love it, like I can have it like massively loud music and it's just great, but then I hear somebody talking on their cell phone through speakerphone, and I'm like, oh, that sounds horrible, like, like, and I don't really have an explanation for that, but it's...
The only reason I was asking, so it's not the same across all the different children growing up. Some of them might have sensory issues in their hearing.
Yeah.
Some of them might not, given you like heavy music and stuff. Did you get into like art, painting, or drawing?
Not so much these days, but as a child, I was physically quite uncoordinated, which actually probably made it harder for me to learn the instruments in some ways. Like I remember I couldn't hold a pen properly until I was like 7 or 8 years old. I had to go to some special class, like one-on-one with somebody teaching me how to like be physically coordinated. Like I have this vague memory of like throwing and catching balls with this medical specialist.
Is that an occupational therapist?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. I think it was an occupational therapist. This was like when I was seven years old. Yeah.
Do you think that helped when you're starting to play instruments? Kind of when you're holding a pen, it's different when you're playing an instrument, right?
Because at that time I would have been learning piano, which is much
easier.
Well, physically easier. You know, it's not like a guitar where you know, there's a bit of physical kind of exertion sort of involved in that. I feel like if I tried to learn guitar at that age, actually, I probably wouldn't have really been able to stick to it because I would have been quite uncoordinated. But I grew out of it, so I feel like, I mean, I guess I still have elements of clumsiness, but it was a problem when I was like a young child, but it hasn't been a problem since.
How was it like for you learning instruments in terms of like guitar when you were on your journey learning guitar? When you were holding a pen, you cannot hold the pen, right?
Yeah.
So when you're starting to learn your guitar, what's the journey? Did it make it harder for you to learn guitar?
Probably. I'd say so. I mean, it's kind of hard for me to guess because I've only really known it the way that I've learned it, you know. Okay. But I'd say it probably was a slow journey. I mean, I can remember being in my, like, especially when I started like kind of playing in bands and in my late teens, early 20s, I started getting into more extreme sort of technical sort of metal music and like really wanting to kind of push myself and like learn and just really struggling, not being able to do things that like I could see other people doing, like learning and picking up and I kind of just could figure it out, but in very janky kind of ways, you know, like in ways that are probably not
standard.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
What sort of band?
At that point in time, that was kind of I was in a band called Adrenochrome back around the time I was in my early 20s, and sort of
metal.
Yeah, kind of getting towards death metal, but I guess this was the 2000s. We were quite into sort of there was a lot of that metalcore sort of stuff coming up. So it was sort of like crossing the line between some of that, but with some of the more extreme sort of death metal stuff as well. Yeah.
Do you write the songs?
I've always been I feel like my creativity is probably more of a strong point for me than my ability to, you know, I feel like, I mean, kind of going back to what I was saying before about figuring things out in sort of different ways, like I'd almost be writing parts that are too hard for me to play and then sort of kind of...
How do you manage that?
I was using a computer program, Guitar Pro at the time. So I'd be writing guitar riffs on that and like just writing them, but like not necessarily having the guitar in front of me, you know, and sort of just coming them up with them because I could play them back with MIDI and then be like, oh yeah, that's cool. And then I'd try and play it and be like, oh, what? and then sort of teaching myself.
Self-taught, right?
Yeah, I mean, I did have lessons, but I feel that my mother kind of was insistent on me having lessons, which is probably a good thing, but I feel like I really developed skills better when I was sort of doing it my own way. Yeah.
Now, what's the journey when you're finding your own band? Given, or in some cases, most cases, when someone is autistic, people find that person weird, but how did you find, or how did you formed your band, did they kind of found you weird at first?
Oh yeah, I think that I've been in a fair few bands over the years, and I kind of just assume everyone thinks I'm weird, you know? So, you know, like when we're sort of creatively working on stuff in the room, I feel like I can really connect and stuff, and like I can really sort of get into the zone and connect with people in that environment. And then it might be like, oh, let's go out, let's take a break. And then everyone starts talking about something else. And I'm kind of just sort of like, I don't know. Yeah. Like they'll be talking about something to do with, I don't know, sports or video games or something. And I'm just like, oh, I just want to get back and do the music. And then, you know, like I lose the connection sometimes, right. You know. So
do you mask?
I think it's something that is sort of, for a lot of my life was happening without me sort of consciously knowing that's what I was doing. That's, I guess, going back to what I was saying before about reading up on autism and stuff, when I started to kind of make those connections, and then I learned about the concept of masking, and I sort of was like reading about it, I was like, oh, that's a bit strange. And then sort of thinking about it a bit more, I'm like, have I been doing this? Like, and I don't even notice that I've been doing that. And I don't know. I've spoken to a few people who are, you know, adult diagnosed autistic people, and who also say, you know, things like that, you know, they did that just almost as a subconscious sort of coping mechanism.
Probably a difficult question. What's the strategy behind that? But I don't know if you will be able to answer it because it's subconscious now. If we are going to meet first time, and then do you have a strategy? It's actually not strategy. I mean, what triggers you to like, oh, I think I need to mask now?
I think it kind of, there's a few factors there. I feel like because, you know, I feel I'm quite sensitive to other energies and stuff, other people's energies, and sometimes I'll come across somebody and I click with them, and I don't need to mask at all. I can just be myself, and I can feel confident in the way I'm acting, and it's fine. There are some other environments, I think, like things like work environments, for example. You know, I've worked in, and I continue to work in customer service, which is a challenging thing to do for, like, I work at the library. But, you know, you kind of just sort of, it's almost like a survival sort of instinct in a way. You know, you feel like, oh, you know, I have to keep doing this thing, and I want to leave a good impression, I guess. I guess for me, leaving a good impression for other people is subconsciously quite important. So I guess that's where a lot of the masking stuff comes from, because it's like, oh, I have to kind of figure out how they're at. Like often, like, yeah, that's often a thing, is like, I'll sort of, for people I don't necessarily have that intuitive connection with, I find myself almost sort of copying their behaviors. Maybe not literally copying, like doing exactly what they're doing, but just sort of like picking up on subconsciously on the way of what they're doing, and then me thinking, oh, this is how I have to act around this person, you know, and
eventually you build up that skill, right?
Yeah. Although I think also, say it's someone I'm working with, or I work with over a period of time, you know, they'll kind of get used to the way that I am and stuff, and maybe the mask may slightly wear away a little bit over time after I sort of have got past that point of being like, oh, I have to give a good impression, you know.
If we go back to your band, what's the heaviest band that you're into here in New Zealand when you got here?
The heaviest band? You're
sort of into different genre, right?
Or band that I'm in.
That you're in.
It depends on what you mean by heavy, I guess, in terms of traditional, I mean, traditional idea of like heaviness and metal, like brutality. Yeah. Probably the one I was talking about, Adrenochrome, was probably the most extreme metal. But then, you know, I got later on into Opium Eater, which was heavy in a different way. I feel like, you know, that's more kind of going down that sludge metal atmospheric. So that's more heavy in a sort of almost like grinding away rather than just like, say, with adrenochrome, which was more fast and technical, you know. So I guess heaviness can kind of
It varies.
and it can mean different things. But yeah, but I've also been in sort of like done like harsh noise stuff, and which is kind of a different thing again, you know. Yeah. So
When you're forming a band and you are into like, I don't know what influence you're into at that point in time. How do you usually like form a band? I mean, like, I know there's a connection between you and the band and stuff like that, but how do you try to figure out if you will click? Like, let's say we were forming a band.
yeah.
How are you going to assess, like, is it going to be like, are we gonna click with in terms of musical writing or genre that we wanted?
I guess, you know, there's a few things there, like, say, I mean, a lot of the people I've ended up working with musically, they will have been in other bands before that, you know, and I might have really liked their band and sort of liked what they're doing. And yeah, for example, now at the moment I'm in a two-piece project, Sighthound, which is me and another guy.
What's his name?
Matt Hoffman. He does vocals and has a drum machine, and I'm playing guitar through 3 amps, and it's.
How did you meet?
He's in another band called Murgatroyd, who.
Is that same genre?
Well, when I was in Opium Eater, we did some gigs. We played with Murgatroyds, and then, yeah, at some point, I guess me and him sort of just started talking, and we got together, and I really liked what he'd been doing with that band. I could see it, like, you know, I think a lot of it is often from the live performance as well, seeing how people perform on stage. I'm quite a sort of high energy performer. Like, I, you know, move around a lot. It's just something that comes naturally to me. It's not really, I'm going on a tangent here, but it gets to it. It may look like I'm being a show pony, you know, I'm jumping around like a lunatic, but it's just what feels natural to me when I'm playing that kind of music. I just move, you know. And I remember seeing his band, and he's a vocalist, and he kind of just really had a high energy, like really aggressive, almost threatening kind of energy to it, you know, like it feels kind of almost a bit scary to watch, you know, but I really kind of like, oh yeah, I like that, you know, yeah, and then we just kind of started jamming, and it just really clicked straight away. So I guess going back to the question, the original question, if it's somebody who I've seen in other bands, and then I've seen something about the way they're doing music that I'm like, I can really imagine like us sort of clicking in that way, you know. But then it really comes down to like, getting in the room and trying to make music together, and you know, I think that's when you really start to discover if it's how it's going to work, you know, like, because quite often, like, I'll jam with somebody and it's like, oh, you know, I like what you're doing, but I don't really, I might not necessarily be clicking with that, you know, intuitively, you know. I can because I can really admire someone's music and really enjoy the music, but I might not necessarily
Work with that,
you know. Or it may feel forced, you know, and that's not really a good zone for me to be in. I feel like when you feel that click, it's like, oh, yep, you can kind of sort of start paving things.
How do you usually write songs when you start working with a person? And like, hey, we're gonna do some practice.
So I think my style around that has really evolved over the years, because I started writing songs as a teenager, and I was talking about before, this program Guitar Pro, when I was a teenager, and I'd be like writing these fully structured pieces. Like, I'd be
Like full song.
Yeah, like I'd be doing my guitar parts and then I'd be like, oh, I can picture how the bass sounds in my head and then the drums, and I'd put them all together. And like there's been times where I've been sort of almost that dictator sort of songwriter. Here's your part. Over time, I've sort of found that I'm much more interested in the collaborative process, you know, trying, you know, it's easy. It's quite natural for me to kind of just get carried away with ideas. But I've actually found often it's more rewarding when I sort of hold back on that and sort of just be like, well, here's an idea. I want to see how someone else reacts to that and see. And then the way they react to that or what they bring to the table, the next stage may be something what I wasn't envisioning to begin with. It may kind of go in an unexpected direction.
How do you feel about it? Like, this is what your plan, and sometimes it goes this way or that way.
Yeah.
How do you feel about it?
I think it's something that I've really taught myself to embrace. It's not something which maybe necessarily
Comfortable for you, is it?
maybe didn't come intuitively at the start, but I've sort of seen the kind of losing the word, I can't find the word, see the kind of potential. Yeah, see the potential in where that can lead. And I've found that embracing that way of sort of just not allowing myself to get too controlling of the vision actually leads to more rewarding and interesting results. And now I'm at the point where I've done that enough where it actually kind of does sort of seem almost natural. Even though it may not have, 10 years ago, I feel like, sometimes practicing things in a certain way. Or
do you feel comfortable/uncomfortable when you play in public places or in a gig at first? Did you felt?
Like when I started?
When you started?
No, my at the very start, like when I was in my first band in high school. I was about 15, 16. I think anyone, I got nervous, but I don't think it took me very long to kind of get used to it. I come across a lot of people, I hear a lot of people saying, oh, playing in public, that's really makes me nervous.
Or anxious maybe.
Yeah. There's maybe some element of that, but for me, I feel as long as I sort of know what I'm doing, or...
Your prep.
Yeah, I think that's the key. That's the key to that, is sort of being in control of what you're doing, or like you as a unit, as a band. If you're prepared, then I feel like I'm totally comfortable. I feel like a lot of social scenarios, I do get very nervous, like talking to people, stuff. And I guess maybe part of that is because you don't know how a conversation's going to go with a person or a stranger or whatever, and that makes me nervous. But then playing a gig on stage, it's like, I know we've practiced the stuff, we know what we're going to do, and I'm totally at ease in that situation. So I feel like just to kind of slightly sidestep, like I was thinking, like, if I'm having to talk in front of an audience, like not playing music, if I have to do it on the spot with no preparation, it's the most terrifying thing in the world. But then if I've prepared for that situation, then I'm totally fine.
Have you encountered anything similar like that? Like you're anxious because, I don't know, maybe you haven't prepared?
Yeah, no, there have been times for sure. Yeah.
How did you deal with that?
All you can really do is just get on with it. There have been some disastrous times. I remember I was in one band where I was actually playing keyboards and I hadn't really done that in a band before, even though I had that history and background in playing piano. And I had a bit of a strange setup that I was trying to wrangle, and we did a gig, and I just was not prepared, and like I hadn't got all my stuff all set up properly, but it was like, we got to play. And then the band starts playing and I'm basically having a panic attack on stage, because Yeah, I feel like sometimes it just becomes like sort of, you know, so there's either going to be a fight or flight response. And like, I guess for me in that scenario, because I'm also very like, you know, I have a bit of pride as a musician, you know, I don't want to be seen as like incompetent. So I feel like, no, I have to just do the thing. I just have to keep going, you know, and whatever happens, happens. And it, yeah, you know, in the moment it might seem like the most terrifying thing ever. But then, you know, here I'm sitting however many years later, and it's almost kind of funny to think back on, you know.
I was actually about to ask you that, but you answered it. Did you play any music with anyone who's neurodivergent as well that you're aware of?
I've got suspicions about certain people that, you know, like, you know, I'm not the kind of person that wants to kind of do the diagnose other people, but, you know, I feel, especially since I've had my diagnosis and I've read up on the traits and I have an understanding of neurodivergence and stuff, you start to notice those things in other people, you know, and there are definitely people I've worked with, like that person probably is, you know.
Yeah, kind of in the...
Yeah, but it's not always obvious, you know. Yeah.
Like the masking thing, like, okay.
Yeah. There's one person who I was in a band with, I won't name it because I, you know, I haven't had this conversation with this person, but like thinking back, I'm like, oh, that guy was definitely autistic. I don't think he knows to this day, but, you know, or even thinks about it, but yeah.
With your Sighthound, so how did you make that music with Matt?
They're quite experimental, that project. Yeah. Okay, yeah, no, that was a really interesting project. We kind of started that, and we actually, okay, so the way I actually, now that I'm thinking about it, I can remember how it actually started. There's a, at Valhalla, there's a sort of noise night from time to time, noise drone repeat it's called, and it's like a lot of experimental whatever sort of stuff, like
you can do whatever you want.
Yeah, but like it's usually quite weird and like experimental.
They also have this emo nights and stuff.
Yeah, no, yeah, that's a different.
Is that different?
Yeah, that's completely. Yeah. This is like sort of, you might have somebody doing crazy stuff with modular synths, or you might have somebody with a guitar amp just like it's just a kind of very sort of eclectic experimental sort of night that happens every couple of months or so. And I had been asked to do it, and I didn't really know what to do. Like, I mean, like I'd done it in the past with other people. I'd sort of done like, you know, a couple of one-off collaboration sort of things. There was one of the other guys in Opium Eater. We had a little side project, Opiate Sleeper, where we sort of did sort of a little bit more experimental sort of stuff. But anyway, yeah, there was one, I got asked to do this noise drone repeat, and I was just like, I don't know what I'm going to do. I've got to figure something out. I've got like a month or so. And I was talking to Matt, like, and we'd sort of vaguely been talking about making some music together. And I think I just remember suggesting, this must have been back in 2021, maybe? Yeah, 21. And like I just said, hey, do you want to do this noise night? We'll just like make something up, see what happens, you know? And that's exactly what we did. I sort of just did some improvised guitar stuff. He'd had his drum machine going, like had some beat playing, and I was playing guitar over it, and he was kind of screaming over the top of that. We kind of ended up like like we had some really enjoyable jams, and we kind of ended up sort of almost writing songs through improvising, but it was almost like controlled improvisation sort of in a way. We'd have some vague ideas of a song structure. He'd set his drum beat going, I'd have some kind of riff, but we weren't really tightly bound to the structure of this thing, and we sort of almost slightly changing it each time we did it. So there would be sort of something of a song structure there, but then it might sort of develop over time, you know. Eventually we did that. We've been doing that for about three and a half years now. A lot of our material has just been generated through hours and hours of improvising.
Do you like record your improvisation?
Yep.
Where do you usually record?
I've got a little field recorder, like a Zoom, one of the Zoom recorders, you know, like Zoom H6 I've got now. I didn't started off with an H1. Now I've got a Zoom H6. Yeah, we record every jam we do, and I'll send it through to him, and then we'll come back next time, and then we'll sort of do the same thing, but it might change a little bit each time. It's the first time I've really created music in that way, you know. I guess that kind of follows on from what I was saying earlier about, you know, letting go of having to sort of figure things out beforehand, you know. Sometimes in the moment when you're just playing around, there might be some moment of magic that just happens. I might just be playing the part on the guitar. I use a loop pedal as well, so I can play a part and then sort of set the loop pedal and then play something over it. And then I might kind of just randomly on the spot come up with something. I'm like, ooh, that's really good. And then that becomes part of the next iteration of the piece. And then, yeah, building it in that kind of way.
How many pedals do you have?
How many pedals do I have?
You're a guitarist. There's not going to be enough pedal for a guitarist.
Yeah. Oh, how many pedals? I might have about 20 pedals.
Wow. Yeah. That's a lot.
They're not always all on my board at the same time.
You kind of like switch pedals.
But more recently, I've got into this crazy idea with Sighthound because we kind of really wanted to sound bigger, you know, like more epic and more full and loud. And that's where I got into this idea of having a 3-amp setup.
3 amp?
3 amps, yeah, which is ridiculous, but it does it works in the way I intended it to, you know, which is I sort of thought I've got 2 guitar amps, I've got a bass amp, and so I've got a signal splitter so at the start my guitar goes into an ABY switch, which then splits off into 2 signals. So I've got my guitar pedals. I'll go through one, and then I got bass pedals through the other one, and that goes into the bass amp. And so I'm kind of doubling it. Like there's an octave thing in the bass to make it, you know,
sound lower.
Sound lower, yeah, sound lower. So it kind of sounds like there's that lower frequency thing there as well. And then I've got the loop pedal as well, so I can set the loop going through 1 or 2 amps, and then use the switch to go over to the other amp. So got lots of layers end up going on at the same time. But
do you down tune?
Not that much. I have in the past. Back when I was in Adrenochrome,
too long time ago.
This is like well over a decade ago. We were playing in drop C, but I haven't really gone lower than that. Although it's quite interesting. I remember because in Opium Eater we were very set on the idea of being in standard tuning, but trying to make that as heavy as possible, you know. Well, the bass player had a 5-string, so he'd often be going down lower, which I think gives the impression of it sounding deeper, you know. But yeah, no. One common comment I remember getting in that band is like people asking what tuning we're in. I'm like, standard tuning, and people just not believing it, you know, being like, what? No way, that's not possible. You know, how can it sound? That's not what standard tuning sounds like, but you know, I don't know. Yeah.
Do you listen to music where sometimes you can recognize patterns or maybe a note, like ding, or that's a C, or ding, or that's a D? Oh,
you mean can I like pick up notes from listening to it? Yeah. I mean, I'm not quite at the sort of perfect pitch level, but like
yeah, that's the word, perfect, or words, perfect pitch.
Yeah, perfect pitch. No, I mean, I have pretty strong relative pitch, like, so I think with perfect pitch it's the sort of thing like someone can play a note and people with perfect pitch will just know what that is. They won't even need to think about it, whereas I could hear a note and then I can figure that out if I sort of, like, I'll have some kind of reference point in a way. Like I'll sort of be thinking of like how I'll think of a song, you know, like and I know that that song's in that tuning, and then I sort of think, oh, yep, that's that note. So I'll figure it out by sort of like thinking about something else to kind of connect that. Does that make sense? Yes. Yeah.
What sorts of influences do you have? Like we were talking about your CDs, there's a lot or huge list of CDs you've got there. So what influences you've got in order to like for you to want to play in a band?
My music tastes are really very eclectic. And more recent, I mean, when I say more recent, like as in the last 10 to 15 years, I'm just really into, I got into a lot of like heavy atmospheric sort of stuff, you know, but then that can be anything from like, you know, the sludge metal stuff, like, you know, to like post-rock sort of stuff, some atmospheric drone stuff, lots of metal, but then like also, I also have a soft spot for some pop music and stuff as well, you know.
Like what?
Oh gosh, I mean, like sometimes some really like stuff that might be embarrassing. I don't know. I've recently been listening to a pop artist called Charlie XCX, which is like she headlined Laneway Festival recently. That's the sort of thing that a lot of people might look at me like, what? Like, you know, it's pop, it's modern pop music, you know. But then the next minute I might be like listening to Meshuggah or something like that, you know, like, or yeah.
I heard there's someone interviewed by, who's this guy? Rick Beato. He was interviewing this someone. I forgot the name of the guy he was interviewing, and then the guy said like he watched a Taylor Swift concert or something like that. I forgot if it's Taylor Swift even. He got an idea from that by watching that concert, and then he created a music somewhat similar to that, but it's not pop. Okay. So I think that makes sense if sometimes you like other genre as well.
Yeah, I think like I'm more interested in the vibe, like, you know, to me the idea of genres is something I don't really care too much, you know, like, you know, I think like the vibe of the music, like, you know, sometimes I'll hear like a pop song that's quite dark, you know. I used to, not really so much now, but like I went through a bit of a, going back to pop music, went through a bit of a phase of like listening to Lady Gaga, you know, and some of her stuff's a bit more edgy than, you know, the sort of a bit darker and moody, mysterious about, like, I really like that sort of, those sorts of feelings, you know, like something that's a bit dark, but also a bit sort of, can be a bit theatrical in ways.
I won't say his name. I know a metalhead, like full-blown metalhead, who sometimes listen to Taylor Swift because of kids.
Yeah.
He's got no choice.
Yeah. Fair enough. Yeah.
When you go like more on into technical stuff when writing your song, and do you remember we were talking about before, like sometimes your goal is going here and then suddenly you sway over in this part, sway over that. Yeah. When you're writing a song, maybe in your past band, especially when you're getting into more technical stuff, like when you say technical, it should be like same kind of like breakdown. Yeah. There should be no kind of like swaying in side by side. How do you feel about that? If it's a D, it's a D. It's not A, it's not B or something like that.
Yeah. I used to be very rigid in my way of thinking and like kind of uncompromising, you know, like I've like come up with this idea and I can kind of hear it in my head a certain way and I'm just like, that's the way it's got to sound, you know, like that. We have to do it in this precise way, you know, but that's something which I feel I've learnt to be a bit more open about, you know.
How does your band feel about it as well? If let's say we're gonna need to sway it a little bit, it sounds cooler than this.
There's been times in the past where I've really gotten into butted heads with people over this sort of thing, you know, like I'll have a vision and I'm like, hey, I'm like, and you know, sometimes people don't like being told what they have to play, you know, fair enough, you know, but at the time I'm just like, oh no, but then if you don't do it this way, then it's gonna like, the whole thing's not going to work, you know, because it's already been constructed in my head to work in that specific way.
Yeah.
And then any kind of compromise on that, like at the time, I sort of felt like was like, no, that's sort of compromising the idea of what it's meant to be, you know. Or diluting it in some way. Yeah. So
where have you gigged? Like what location or places have you gigged?
I grew up in Tauranga as a teenager. That's where I started. And we were, there weren't that many venues. There was like maybe a couple of venues that I don't think are even around anymore. This is going back to the 2000s. Crazy Jack's Brewers Bar, both those places don't exist anymore, as far as I'm aware. Coming to Wellington, Valhalla is a very common spot. I played at San Fran, played at Meow, Moon, played up in Auckland at a few of the venues. In Opium Eater, we went over to Australia. That's the furthest I've been. Been down to the South Island a couple of times. A few places around the country.
So what's the vibe around the country when you were playing with your song or with your band? Or I know you don't like the word genre, but if you're playing a metal genre versus atmospheric genre, what's kind of like differences?
I guess that was an interesting thing, particularly being an Opium Eater, is that we were sort of ended up on a lot of bills where we didn't really necessarily, I'm not going to say we didn't fit. Like, it's not like we were out of place so much, but, you know, maybe just a bit sort of like, a little bit oddball, you know, in sense. Because we were doing that sort of atmospheric sludge metal thing, but especially at that time, because when we were really, I mean, it was probably about 5 to 10 years ago when we were really at our most active. And there was a lot of like stoner doom sort of stuff around at that time, so we'd end up on those bills. We actually opened for a few international bands, like, but it was always like, you know, we like these stoner doom sort of bands.
What band?
We opened for a few bands. Bongzilla was one. Conan, Weed Eater, Windhand, a lot of sludgy stoner doom sort of stuff. And I don't know. I don't know. I'm not going to say it didn't I didn't feel negatively about it, but it always made me feel a bit funny. I was like, are we being lumped into this sort of niche, which I don't really feel that is the niche that, you know, that we're in. But I'm sort of, I guess, like, when I'm talking about like not being interested in genres, that is definitely a part of my way of operating as well. Like, you know, like, I feel like a lot of the musicians I've come across, and people sometimes in bands I'm playing with, some people are like this, some people aren't, but some people thinking like, oh, you know, we're trying to do this kind of music, we're trying to play this sort of specific style of music, and we want to sound like these bands. And to me, that's just like not interesting at all. You know, like, I'm more interested in sort of like, okay, having a starting point of like whatever genre we might be, and then sort of like, oh, how can we mess with this? How can we fuck with it a bit, you know, to make it like a bit interesting and different? Because I don't know, like, for me personally, a lot of the music I really find myself enjoying is bands sort of being the left field thing in that genre, you know, or doing something like playing in you can identify what the genre of music is, but they're doing something that's a bit weird, you know, and sort of, I don't know, that's the sort of thing that sort of I find myself becoming interested in, as opposed to, like, you know, you might hear a band that sort of is, if I hear a band and I can clearly hear what their influences are and stuff, like, I don't know, it's fine, you know, I'm not like against it, but it's just, I tend to lose interest a bit more. But I also find that my best creative work tends to come when I'm sort of just pushing beyond those boundaries, I guess.
How long do you usually work when you're in the zone? I learned. Oh, no, I'll let you answer that before I put my comment.
What was...
If you're in the zone, like writing music, like playing with your effects or guitar, how long do you usually go and play, and then suddenly you're in the zone and you have lost your time?
Yeah, I think, like, I mean, getting into the zone is not something that I can, it's not a button I can sort of push on and off, you know, always. I think, like, sometimes I will kind of play music and I'm just doing it, and I thought that's what I wanted to do, but then, you know, like after 10 minutes I might just be like, I'm not, you know, or after 20 minutes I'm like, oh, nothing's happening. But then other times I may start doing it and then just suddenly I'm coming up crazy ideas like all at once on the spot, you know, and it's sort of almost just like a faucet turning, and it's just like things come out, and then I lose track of time, and then it's like 2-3 hours later and I have no sense of time passing. And so yeah, it is really context dependent on, but when the zone comes, I could just keep doing it all day, you know.
And if you are going to give advice to a kid or kids who are neurodivergent or autistic, what sort of advice would you give them if they wanted to go into that music path or art kind of path?
Just don't get too caught up on other people's concepts of rules, you know, or standards, you know, because they may not apply to you, even though you may think that that's what you're supposed to do, you know. I think often you might find that when you're following your own unique voice, that that's going to be much more fruitful and enjoyable, and you're probably going to come out with better stuff.
Any advice can you also give when it comes to anxiety or being anxious on stage? You've got a lot of experience on stage, and here you are, you're still managing.
For me, being as prepared as possible is the best way to manage anxiety on stage. Getting to a point where, well, it really depends on the nature of what you're doing, but often just getting to a point where you're not really having to think about what you're playing, you know, and practicing and being prepared enough to the point where it almost can become an automatic process. The more prepared you are, the less I feel that any sense of anxiety is going to affect or detract from what you're doing. It's different for everyone though, you know.
But at least there's something that someone who's neurodivergent can start from. You know, there's some kind of like something there in the past, but you've just been recently diagnosed, and you're just learning about being as an autistic person. Now, what do you think are the misconceptions of autism? That
there are so many misconceptions. Feel
free to just.
One thing I've learned about autism and neurodivergence is that it in itself is like a very wide umbrella, and it often operates on what people might, like people, society at large might see as extremes, you know. It can operate almost in opposite ways sometimes, like there may be sort of one person who has like certain sensitivities around things, or doesn't talk much, or is awkward in some ways, but then there may be another autistic person who's almost the opposite, you know, like they're sort of, rather than being hypersensitive to things, are like kind of have a lack of sensitivity in that area. Or where one person may be really shy and not be very good at sort of socializing in certain ways, there may be another autistic person who is extremely good in that way. And then, you know, like, so I don't know how to frame it in a really articulate way, but yeah, I don't know. I feel like there's just so many variations, and I feel like society often likes to sort of see these sorts of things in specific stereotypes, you know, so they sort of say, oh, like they know they may have come across one autistic person and they think, oh, that's how all autistic, you know, like, or they might sort of pick up on certain sort of stereotypes or things and sort of think that they can apply that across the whole spectrum. But really, I feel like it can be so wide.
Do you still remember what's the weirdest thing or event that happened in your life that other people see as weird, but it's kind of like you thought it's cool? But any weird moments, should I say?
Can't think of that on the spot.
Oh, that's okay.
I'll probably think of an answer like in 3 days' time or something.
and then message me. Yeah. What song can you listen to in 24 hours? Just one song in repeat.
One song I can listen to on repeat.
I've seen you've got lots, and if you can only pick one song, or maybe we can be forgiving, one album maybe.
One album, yeah. I'm more of an albums person than a songs person, so that
makes sense now.
Well, like I spoke earlier about from a very young age becoming obsessed with the Stranglers. I still have that enduring sort of love for that band. The Raven by the Stranglers is an album that I can listen to over and over again, and that connects to my childhood. There's nostalgia, but there's also a genuine enduring interest in that.
What's the biggest game changer for you as an autistic person?
I mean, we're talking about music. For me, that's absolutely the most biggest. I'm not sure if this is the right way to answer this question, but I feel like just having that sort of intuitive ability to do this thing, having this intuitive ability to play music and write music and create music, whereas a lot of other things just seem confusing and perplexing in life. I feel like that's been the one grounding factor that I can sort of always come back to and keep doing, and it always makes sense to me, where a lot of other things may not make sense and be making me want to tear my hair out, you know. I feel like just being able to turn to music is always the enduring thing.
When life is confusing, you mentioned confusing, what do you usually do? What technique, strategies, how do you deal with it?
I turn into a hermit and will just blast records on the stereo.
What's next for you?
What's next for me? Keep on playing music. Hoping to record some more music with Sighthound. I would like to sort of just keep getting stuck in with more music projects and try and not procrastinate as much as I sometimes do. I'd like to become do more projects, really.
Do you know what? I heard that word procrastinate.
Yeah.
Someone said like, do productive procrastination. When I was thinking like, what was that? Like, and then someone says like, let's say you're writing a song and then you want to procrastinate. So instead of writing a song, you go and maybe you read something about songs. I don't know, a book about music, something like that. It's still productive. But a few more questions. What is music for you?
What is music? It's the life's blood, you know. It's the one thing that kind of makes sense to me. It's always been there. Like, I mean, like, you know, like I was talking earlier about, like, I don't have the memory of when I started being interested in music. It's always been there. And probably will always be there. I can't even imagine a life without having this obsession.
What is heavy metal?
Heavy metal is that sort of taking music into sort of quite a sort of aggressive and visceral form, and sometimes that is just a really great sort of feeling, you know. Like, I've come across people, like, you know, I've got family members who'll be like my mother or whoever, not speaking disparagingly, but like, you know, people who sort of be like, what? Like, they can't understand it, you know. They just think it's sort of aggressive screaming and like, why do you want to have that harsh, unpleasant thing? But, you know, I think there's just like an energy there, which is just really powerful and positive, and can be really positive, you know, even though it is angry. I mean, yeah, aggressive. Yeah. It sort of is a positive aggression.
One last, sorry.
No, yeah,
One last.
No, yeah, we're good.
What is autism?
What is autism?
Up to you. It can be technical. You can be just lay terms.
Neurodevelopmental, is that the word they use it? Condition. People who are autistic see the world in a kind of different way, I guess, to sort of the neurotypical norm. While there may be a lot of ways that we struggle within the norms of society, can also really bring valuable sort of unique insights into the world in other ways, you know. And I feel like that's really important for humanity. It makes things more diverse, you know, and interesting.
How can people find your music?
A lot of it's on Bandcamp. I've done a lot of projects. My current one is Sighthound. We just put out an EP. That's on Bandcamp. sighthoundmusic.bandcamp.com. My previous band's Opium Eater. That's on Bandcamp. I was in a band, Liberating. That's on Bandcamp. Pretty much everything I've done in the last 10 years at least, you'll find something on Bandcamp. You can look me up on Facebook. I got a lot of my bands linked, like just in my profile. What's
Bandcamp? Sorry, this is now a little off topic. I've seen some of but I can still put it here. But I've seen a lot of recording, like the DIY-ish bands doing Bandcamp. Is it where most DIY would prefer to put their music? Yeah, well, I guess you got to like Bandcamp allows artists to have a lot more kind of agency, like as opposed to the other streaming services. You know, you sort of create your own profile and you upload your music yourself, and it's not like a traditional streaming service in the sense that you pay a subscription. It's like people can pay to download the music, or often bands will have their physical albums, CDs or vinyl for sale directly through their Bandcamp, and a large portion of the money spent through Bandcamp just goes directly to the artist as well. So it's seems to be a model that sort of allows artists to have a lot more agency over their own music and how it's sort of presented, compared to, you know, your sort of Spotify's and all that, which it's gives them more control.
Yeah.
And can you sell merch in there, right? You can sell merch on
Bandcamp.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. Yep. Right. I'm just learning about this. I just recently being into like interviewing bands and stuff like Bandcamp.
I like it. I like Bandcamp. Yeah. That's what I always defer to, you know, when I'm like putting music online, you know, like often, like a lot of the stuff I've done with other people, it will end up on all the other streaming services and stuff, but that's all usually something that you just sort of, it gets distributed through some kind of
just for people who are neurodivergent and want to release it's easier to release your own music in Bandcamp, right?
You got a lot more control about what you're doing.
I mean, apart from recording it, you're gonna have to spend time to recording your music. But when it comes to releasing it in Bandcamp, it's not as challenging as, I don't know, maybe put it in Spotify or
Bandcamp. I find it's pretty easy. You just create the profile, and then you can pretty much just upload the music. Very easy.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you for your time. Really appreciate it. I know you're busy, and it's a Saturday.
Yeah, no, it's all
nice
good.
meeting you, and can I get a fist bump?
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you. One second.
Yeah, that's okay.
You know what happened here? It just went there. Right. Anyway.
Okay.
Okay, so
Yeah.
you're talking about Lemmy, Motorhead, is it?
No, that's the Stranglers.
Ah, okay.
Yeah.
It's a different Lemmy.
Oh, let me.
Ah, yeah, is that the one? Lemmy. Fuck.
Oh, let me. Yeah, let me. Yeah.
Okay,
Sorry.
I misheard it. I thought it's Lemmy from Motorhead.
No.
So it's different. Like
Yeah.
it's kind of like debunking. What you call that? Truth versus. I forgot the term. Okay. All right. With your sound. What does that? Your project sound.
Sighthound.
Sighthound.
Yeah. There's so many misconceptions. A neurodevelopmental.